coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. This week, we're picking right back up where we left off after last week's conversation about virginity and virtue and teen sexuality on Gilmore Girls, and moving on to portrayals of adult sexuality. We're going to be covering everything from Lane waiting for marriage and her first time doing it on a beach in Mexico, right up to the lack of good, LGBTQ plus representation on the show.
Yeah. From here to eternity. That's ambitious. But anyways, before we get started, this is your regular reminder that this is a spoilers all podcast. We will definitely be spoiling some major plot points, so proceed with caution if you're really concerned about that. And if you could do all those YouTube-y things like subscribe, share, and comment your spicy takes below, we would be so grateful because the engagement really does help. All right, Laura, where did we leave off last week?
Lane Kim, front and center. Welcome to episode 2. We left off talking about the decision that she and her mother have jointly, but also collectively, I think, forced upon her, and she takes innately to wait to have sex until marriage and her wedding night, the repercussions of that, how it affects her, how it will affect her and Zach's relationship going forward, how it does affect their first encounter, and anything and everything in between.
Yes. Lane is an interesting one. I think this was a Mickey Atkins video. I don't even remember which one it was. I think it was her. Could be somebody else. But I made a note because I was just like, holy moly, that feels like Lane to me, and is it's just so indicative of what we're dealing with something like this, where it's like 0 to 100 on the wedding night has the ability to be well and truly traumatizing for people, especially in a culture where women are sexual objects and property, and they have an obligation to share their body. And I thought that really, unfortunately, encompasses Lane and her experience with Zach. You know, they have a bit of a tumultuous relationship through especially middle of season 6. And then they reconcile by getting engaged after like fighting and breaking up. And I think it's just mere weeks between their breakup and their marriage. And then soon after that, they're in Mexico on their honeymoon, having their first sexual encounter with each other. And they get pregnant from that. And so it's just this, once again, Amy being very concerned with apples not falling far from trees and having things come full circle. And I think people are particularly frustrated with it in Lane's case because of just like some of these like really problematic undertones of the whole like religious repression of sexual desire and all of that kind of stuff. So
yeah, Lane definitely, and we started briefly talking about this at the end of the last episode, but she internalized what her mother had taught her about sexuality and about when you should be having sex, you know, how often you need to do it. Her mother says, you know, if you're lucky like me, you'll only ever have to do it once. And then even after her first time with Zach, she even adopts that mindset. And I think it was just because the first encounter was just not great. We'll get to the reasons why there too. But she goes back to Rory after she comes home and she's like, well, that was a one and done. I don't think I ever want to do that ever again because XYZ, again, we'll get to it. But Lane's sexual arc and her promiscuity in that regard, even within her marriage now, like with your husband, is stunted. I think because, again, of your mother's teaching, but also because you went into it maybe even like not knowing like what to expect, what to do, what to hope for. Probably having a partner who was not as experienced either necessarily. There was just a lot that was going on there that was just not going to lead to good sex, honestly.
Yeah, it's true. I think Mrs. Kim spent years, Lane's whole life really, making her afraid of men and afraid of sex. And that's not really a healthy outlook to pass on to the next generation. So that was unhelpful. And yeah. Even Elaine herself is confused by the fact she's like, I did all these rebellious things, and this is the one thing that sticks. And I mentioned it last week in part 1, where it's just like, it's not just her mom, but it's also like society and the institutions in which she finds herself, especially the religious institution of, you know, her mom's particular brand of Seventh-day Adventist belief. You know, not all religion or spirituality or relationships with deities are bad and damaging. Some are very good for your mental health. Some are positive and uplifting, and others lead to lane. You know, someone who is just completely unsure of herself, unable to grab her own agency, and it's like to take control of her own life and her own decisions, and make these decisions for herself on her own terms. You know, she after she has that conversation with Rory in So Good Talk in the bookstore, she walks out and she runs into her mom and she's like, "You are in my head." And it goes to show that it's not Lane who's in control of her behaviors here. And, you know, it fundamentally robs her of her choice as a woman, and how she moves through these early days with the man who later becomes her husband. But yeah, it's rough to watch them go through all that. And eventually, obviously, they do get married. And I'll just always come back to that conversation that Mrs. Kim has with her about, like, you know, if you're lucky like me, you'll only have to do it once. She comes to her in the bridal suite of the church and is like, "I have something upsetting to talk to you about," as if sex is horrifying and upsetting, you know, like, I can't rationalize that. And then she's right about the part that, like, marriage is a job and that there are rewards that come with that. But then she goes into the whole, like, but there are also sacrifices. There are things you're going to have to do. Terrible things. You need to know what to expect because it'll start early. The man's expectations. You're going to have to kiss him. Like, you know, as if women aren't allowed to have sexual desires or expectations. Like, it's only the men, and women are, you know, just like just completely devoid of any sexual desire whatsoever. Sex is entirely utilitarian. It's a duty, not a delight. All of those kind of things very much so come through in Mrs. Kim's communications about it with her daughter. And that's what's upsetting, I tell you what.
Yeah, and newsflash, Mrs. Kim, your daughter was already having these desires, even if she didn't want to admit them to herself, like, before, you know, you're having this little, like, pre-wedding pep talk with her, trying to, like, hype her up for the wedding night. I don't know how well Lane was ever able to actualize what she was feeling and rationalize it. But again, I think back to, you know, the night that Zach was trying to get some, and that's putting it very crudely, but that's what was happening. And I think there was honestly a part of Lane that was just like, I'm not completely averse to it, but I'm shutting it down because that's all I've ever been taught, and that's all I've ever known. You know, and Zach just doesn't even know what to do with that. He's like, okay, so nothing ever until we're married. And Lane's like, her response is not even, he was just like, I guess. Like, you guess? Why don't you know? Like, but she has no comprehension of what she wants or what she would be comfortable doing. And it's not even that they needed to necessarily, you know, hit a home run that night, but she just completely shut down any intimacy whatsoever. And it's bad when, like you said, it's stemming from, like, your mother's just way too in your head about this, and you haven't been taught that it is okay to experiment and see what you're going to be comfortable with. Again, as long as everything remains above board. And with Zach that night, I feel like it would have been. I don't foresee him pressuring her, but she just was like, we're not even going to go to first or second base. This is just nothing at all.
Yeah. It just slips out of her mouth like she didn't even know what she was saying. Like, it was an unconscious response on her part, which is not a good sign. But I think what you just said there was hitting on a chord, because I find it fruitful to look at the fact that, you know, Zach was like, oh no, I pressured you. I'm a bad, bad man. Like, I should be arrested. And especially looking at that in the light of what happened between Rory and Jess at the party in season 3, and just sort of all the reactions to that, where Zach had all of this guilt for even feeling like he was remotely pressuring a girl into something, whereas Jess just had this complete emotional flare up and bit back at Rory for something that wasn't her fault when he tried to pressure her and tried to take things a little too far when she wasn't ready or willing to consent in that particular situation.
Yeah. I mean, would you flag Zach on the play for anything that night? Or would you say, like, no, he honestly did nothing wrong?
No, I don't think he did anything wrong. I think he tried to do it the right way, where, like, I also find it funny because he's like, I said we should have a special night. I don't say stuff like that. I play guitar. As if, like, the two are somehow mutually, like, exclusive to each other. But that was funny. You know, again, he did something nice for her, made her some dinner, tried to make it romantic and special. He put down rose petals. And, you know, they had been dating a couple of months. They were seemingly committed to each other, at least at the level of boyfriend-girlfriend. He seemed to be loyal. So I don't think necessarily Lane had anything to worry about there. And yeah, like, they're 20. They've been dating 4 months, I think she says. And so it's not an unreasonable time frame for people of that age to consider taking a relationship to that place. I'm not actually sure if Zach's a virgin or not. I would say no, because he's got the whole, like, rock star persona thing going on. And there's, you know, the girls earlier in season 5 where it's implied that, you know, he wants to get some, shall we say. But in the case of, you know, the trajectory of their relationship, I don't think he was out of line for that. But I find it interesting that he went to that place of, like, immediate regret where he was just like, oh my God, I pressured you. I'm sorry. And, you know, I think that speaks to his genuineness in that moment in terms of, like, legitimately wanting to take their relationship to the next step, but only if she's ready. And I don't know if he was expecting her sort of abstinence pledge, shall we say. But neither was she. So there you go. I think he was maybe expecting her to be a little more on the same page. But the other thing that bugs me about that scene, though, is it's the very end when she's like, you're not getting NH tonight. The least I can do is clean up. And so, you know, the idea of the least I can do is domestic labor, not because you did the cooking and this is an equal partnership, but I'm going to do this because I'm not going to perform sex for you. Kind of gross. But Zach, I think, was all right in that particular circumstance.
Yeah, but oh gosh, like, that last part, just, again, I want to throw up. It just literally makes me almost like, it's just sickening. Like, I'm not going to put out, so I'll do the dishes.
I thought you were going to say it's sickening because he put wasabi in ragu.
Why did you have to go there?
I'm inflaming the Italian. I have to make the pasta reference. He's talking about making the spaghetti and, like, throwing it up against the wall to see if it was.
Stop. I thought we were friends.
Just triggering you all over the place.
I'll throw the Malocchio at you. Don't make me do it. And you can look up what that means later. Moving on.
What about the conversation that Rory and Lane had in the bookstore about, you brought this up in part 1, Rory already having had sex with 2 guys in 1 year, and Rory being like, okay, you're making me sound a little slutty. Like, give me your thoughts on that whole interaction.
I think it was just, again, for the partners that even Rory has had at this point in time, she is still very sexually immature. I don't think that she's even able to accept the fact that it is okay to have multiple partners. You know, that, again, as long as everything is consensual, that nobody feels like they're being cheated on or emotionally abused or manipulated. Like, you know, if you're in a relationship with somebody and it doesn't work out and you get into a relationship with somebody else, and again, there's more than one person in the picture within 365 days, oh my gosh, guess what? You're not going to get gonorrhea. You're not going to get gonorrhea and die. Like,
I'm not wearing pearls, otherwise I would be clutching them.
2
Yeah.
partners? And yeah, I feel like it's like Emily just being like, or Richard being like, you can't have 2 partners in a year. And Emily just being like, watch me.
This is Yale, not Amsterdam. Actual reference.
Yeah. But no, like, I mean, it was Rory, I guess, like making herself feel slut shamed, Lane making her feel that way when it's like, again, no one is doing anything wrong here. You both just have not had the experiences that you have either needed or wanted to have had at this point. You're still figuring stuff out, and that's okay, but it doesn't mean that anybody is doing anything wrong here or deserves this sort of judgment. But I think it's also very telling that, again, this is stemming from a conversation of Lane just being like, I hated it. It was probably the worst thing ever. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. But it's funny because the end of the conversation in season 5 there is like, why shouldn't you be slutty? You have absolutely no mother top morals standing in the way of you and your sluttiness. So one, it goes to the whole like mother top morals thing. I think she thinks it's just her mom, but I don't think she realizes exactly how much she's internalized about misogyny and sex and like how much sex you have determining your value. But she asks Rory, is it great? And I love Rory's response, not in front of the books, Lee, as if they're sentient and judgmental. But yeah, obviously we see in season 7, after she gets back from her honeymoon, that it was not great. And she's like, I really thought my mother was being an insane prude when she said that sex is horrible for women, but now I see that, in fact, my mother was the only woman who wasn't willing to maintain this ridiculous, pervasive, media-supported charade. That sex is normal, that sex is a wonderful part of life, that sex is sexy. I mean, can we just not admit it? Sex is not sexy. Sex is horrible. Yeah, she really takes this one first experience and extrapolates it to the worthiness of sex as a whole, which is not a good idea, not fair, not healthy. And, you know, I also love that she says, I'm impressed with the depth of the conspiracy. If you think about it, it says something about the potential power of women, that the entire gender could collude in creating this sex is sexy myth. And I love how she's willing to jump to giant feminist conspiracy before she's willing to consider Zach is lame in the sack.
Yeah, I mean, and that was going to be my next question to you. Like, obviously, she did not have a good first encounter. It left a lot to be desired. No one was on the beach with them that night. But why, if you had to pinpoint like a reason and or reasons, because I think there were multiple here, about why it was lackluster for her and left her never wanting to pursue it ever again. Talk to me about why you think she came to that conclusion.
I think she points out the problems herself, where she's like, you know what? Sand is just dirt, and there were crabs, and there was a pervert with a pair of binoculars, and we took 3 buses from Pedro's for that. I think there was so much expectation around it to make it special and magical, and they overshot. They didn't take the time to explore and to warm up to it. They just sort of like went for it. Rory even calls it ambitious, and she's not wrong. Like, sex on the beach is not a good idea, especially not for a first time. Like, you need a little more like privacy, time, space. And again, expectation management is very important with that. But that's, you know, a part of the big problem is like, it blows my mind that people are willing to legally tie themselves to another human being in the most intimate of relationships without exploring sexual compatibility. And, you know, it makes me think of, you know, fundamentalist Christian influencers. I'm not going to name any names. You know, women who waited until marriage to have sex, and then their sex lives got bad, and then they started talking about it on their own channel, and then their husbands got really upset that they were talking about their crappy love lives on YouTube. And then they created their own sex course, trying to teach other good Christian women how to be sexual. And I'm like, do we not see the problems here? You know, just like the purity culture that raised you and how you're now trying to deconstruct from that and teach other people when you have absolutely no legs to stand on and no credentials to be teaching these things. But if you know, you know. But that kind of stuff is really problematic. And, you know, it just goes to show you can't hack your way necessarily into a good love life or a good sex life. You need to explore these things before and make sure that you're actually compatible with the people you decide to legally shackle yourself to forever, theoretically. And that to me is the main problem with not living together before marriage and not having sex before marriage. So
yeah, and I mean, even once all of those things come into play, like there's still always going to be growth within a relationship in that regard. Things can always get better. And I think that's something that's good to strive for. Like, you can live together before marriage, you can be intimate before marriage, and then still work on making the sex and the intimacy and the even like emotional relation within the marriage better as time goes on. It's not something where it's like, we've got it nailed down, we're good to go right into this. Like, maybe you have had experience and like the compatibility is there, but just keep on building on it. Don't let the fact that you're now legally tied and you have that piece of paper stop you from the betterment of it, but just keep going and knowing, and just know that like sometimes things may be unsatisfactory, might just be a one-off, but like keep the growth train in line, so to say.
yeah, it's true. No marriage will ever be sexually perfect or perfect in any regard. But, that's where Mrs. Kim was right when she said that love and marriage take work. There will be a seasonality to it. Kids change things, jobs change things, illness or death of a parent can change things. And, when you truly love your partner and there's real intimacy and vulnerability and trust, you can weather those things. You can work on it. You can work through it and keep that commitment strong over time. And, it's not a good idea to just cut and run at the first sign of trouble. So, it's not always a death knell, shall we say. And we never actually get an update really on, other than the fact that we see Zach and Lane sort of moving on through their marriage and through their journey with parenting. It's never totally provided to us that they seem to have overcome that, or whether she does have a sexless marriage. I really hope she doesn't. But speaking of parenthood, we have an episode in season 7 called "That's What You Get, Folks, for Making Whoopi," which is, very pointed at that's what you get for having sex. You're saddled with this responsibility forever. You're cursed with a child. You'll never get to be your own person ever again. They had Lane get pregnant her first time out, and that sullied sex for her even more.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not like it can't happen. It obviously does. I'm sure it's happened to countless people and relationships, and sexual encounters, probably very frequently result in that, even if you are being safe or taking measures to avert it. We've talked about this before. I think we both agree that it was just like lazy writing for Lane and just to saddle her with, twins right off the bat. But yeah, I would hate if it just leads her to be like, now here's especially why I never want to do it ever again, because like every union, every time Zach and I are together is just going to result in a child, like, which is false. But maybe she just had some misconceptions about that as well, because she, again, was just never educated on like, how often sex, especially with contraception and protection in place, actually results in a child. You got the very short stick there, Lane, but that's not always how it works.
Well, she said something about a condom because she's like, I was trying to remember things about condoms and bananas. It's like, it's clear that they were trying to be safe, but it reminds me of Ross and Friends when Rachel gets pregnant. It's like, yeah, condoms are only like 97% effective. They should put that on the box. They do. I love that. He just flips out. And Joey gets all concerned too. Always a good time. But yeah, it's just, it's a bad outcome for her. She says it in the episode with her baby shower where she's like, you know, or no, or maybe it's even earlier than that. She's like, I was just about to be a person, you know, like, I'm not ready for this. I think it actually maybe is in this episode where she's like, you know, I just got to be my own person and now I have to be a mom. And later in her baby shower episode, she says, like, I'm going to do everything for them. And so, like, to her, this is kind of a bad outcome because she wasn't ready for this. Maybe she wanted it eventually, but not at 22, not right after getting married. She doesn't have any chance to be in a family unit with just her husband for a while, or for them to pursue their musical goals or other kinds of career goals either. And so it's, again, sort of like, bad decision, bad outcome. Sex is a bad decision. So, like, we're stuck in this place, and Lane becomes the symbol of, you know, the trapped housewife who has nothing outside of the home. And, you know, it's just one of the most disappointing storylines in the entire show. And I think that's, like, pretty universally accepted as true that nobody likes the whole, you know, Lane being stuck. That she's stuck in the cycle. She can't get out. The apple will live under the tree forever. Doesn't get to choose her own life. And once again, an alternate choice could have been made if she wasn't ready. And it wasn't. They just were like, well, I guess that's it. Life is over. Yay. Just like, oh God. Oh God. Why?
Yep. So leading off of that, like, obviously, you know, we've talked about Rory, Lorelai already in part 1. We're starting to dive into Lane here in part 2. But there are other characters on the show who are also active, you know, getting into partnerships, having their own relationships, who even just comment on sex as, you know, a pleasurable thing in life. You know, whether or not we ever see them with somebody. Looking at you, Miss Patty. But would you say that the show is sex positive? And then leading into that, like, let's start talking about some of those other characters who are making and dropping comments about their own sex lives and how it can be fruitful or not.
I struggle with this question, and I think other people do too, because it's so contradictory. The show is internally inconsistent with its views on sex, seemingly. I think Lorelai is a pretty good example of a sex positive character. She's, right from the off, fairly open with her sexuality, and we see it in the first half of season 1. You know, we get her with Max. It's you know, it's the first time we get to see her in sort of like an adult relationship. And so when Max gets stuck in Stars Hollow and she brings him home and they're gonna have coffee, she's ready to go upstairs with him. This is their first date. They're making their way upstairs, and her passion is only interrupted by duty when it comes to friendship and support for Lane. And so she makes the quote unquote responsible decision to let Lane stay the night and not get it on with her downstairs. So there's that. But, you know, I don't think I've ever seen anyone say anything bad about, like, Lorelai was going to sleep up with Max on the first date. What? Like, no judgment there. And then a few episodes later, we see her in his apartment, and things they start heating up a little bit, and she does the whole, like, but Mr. Medina, I need to, like, take a test, you know? When she pretends to be a cheerleader. A little bit icky, but in terms of transgressive fantasies, it's fairly tame and common. It's a little weird, but it's unsurprising that someone who is something, or like is somewhat under arrested development, thinks it's funny to embody a teenager sleeping with a teacher. So there's that.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. You know, but Lorelai becoming a parent at 16 did not have your typical college experience, did not have the typical experience of anyone going through their 20s. Sounds like she did have some, you know, partners throughout the years as Rory was growing up, but obviously never one that stuck around. became a stepfather figure to Rory until Max could have potentially filled that role. So I feel like even Lorelai going into her 30s, just being sex positive, which I think that she was, still just had a lot to learn, a lot that she didn't even know about herself. I feel like she didn't know what she would want in a partner and then how to communicate those desires and those needs. I feel like she was still just very much figuring all of that out as she went, and that's not a bad thing. But I think most of the time, by the time you're Lorelai's age in your mid 30s, you have some of that figured out. So you're not, paddling down the river just trying to figure out, where do I land here? What do I like? What do I want to, pick up, so to say? And her partners were very understanding, I think, of the fact that she did need to figure things out, and they gave her the time and space when she needed it. But Lorelai was still just very inexperienced in her own right. Again, not in terms of the physicality of things, but I think in terms of the emotional weight that that goes along with it.
Yeah, she even says in the revival, like, she's not much one for one night stands, but she's had some 3-night stands. And so, obviously she was dating and exploring when Rory was younger. Damn it, do that all the time. Technically accurate, but hard to differentiate. Yeah, she tries to keep it from Rory out of respect for not creating an unstable situation for her. Some people might view her not having guys over to the house as sex negative, but I don't think so. I think it's a practical thing where it's just like, it's really awkward, especially when that guy is your teacher. So like, I'm not surprised that Lorelai kind of jumps on the opportunity to have an intimate night with Max and to try that out while Rory is stuck in Hartford. I don't think she's trying to like hide her sexuality from her daughter so much as like not make it an extremely uncomfortable situation, given that this man is her teacher, and like knowing that her mom is actively upstairs with this guy right now, like doing stuff. So it could be read the sex negative way, and I choose not to. Yeah, I think Lorelai in general is given a lot of latitude to be sexual and to have sexual partners and experiences even into her 30s. We have Alex, and there's no mention of sex there. I would imagine, as to 30-somethings, they probably did it, but there's just no mention of it because it's not relevant. And then we have Jason in season 4, where it's very clear that we have like 2 adults coming to this as equals. She's comfortable staying the night at his place, even though he's got some, insomnia troubles. Yeah, it's portrayed as 2 adults who really like each other and are having a good time. And, they're committed to each other and, being responsible about it. So that's a positive portrayal of, non-marital sex, especially like, the whole like, you're in your 30s, why aren't you married, but don't have sex kind of ideals. If you wait forever to have your first sexual experience, but you don't get married until your 30s, then you're just going to end up like Steve Carell in The 40-Year-Old Virgin, right? And be stunted in a different way. So there's that. But I think that the thing for me that's the most interesting to look at with Lorelai and her sex positivity is Luke. Once again, we have her sleeping with him after the first date, but they have this deep friendship and relationship that has morphed into a romantic interest. And so none of us are surprised or judgmental about it, where we were waiting for this to happen. We were like, yes, they finally did it. Even Sookie was like, so how was it? I always pictured it on a table. She jumps the gun a little bit with assuming that they did it right after they kissed. Like she had no doubts that Lorelai was just going to go right for it the minute they went there. But I think what's really interesting is when she comes down after their first night together in Luke's flannel and everyone sees her. And yet nobody is gossiping about it. Nobody is judging her. The town is more concerned about the potential fallout if this relationship doesn't work, rather than judging Lorelai's sexuality and her being like sleeping with Luke on the first date, because who cares? Because it's not a big deal. Two consenting adults can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were probably people in the diner too who just had no context for what was going on or how long their relationship had been ongoing at that point. It's just, oops, you didn't realize that you shouldn't be coming downstairs right now. I don't know. I think there were definitely people who were just like, I don't care, I'm not going to judge. People who are just like, I'm just here for the pancakes. I don't know what's happening. I just want to eat my meal in peace right now. Is there more coffee? I might need like some Kahlua mixed in at this point. Like, what is going on? But yeah, I think it was more just like what you said. The whole town saw the chemistry and knew that it had been there and existing for years. So the eventuality of these two people getting together and then progressing their relationship that quickly was just unsurprising to anyone who knew them well. So no one was going to judge, because it was just, well, it's about time, you two, don't you think?
Yeah, exactly. I like that mentality a lot more than the judgmental one. I think the only time people were kind of judgmental of Lorelai for having sex was anytime it involved Christopher, because those were her like mistakes. She had sex with him on the balcony, and then she forgot all about Luke because she was wrapped up in stuff. And so, bad friend moment. Again, bad decision leads to bad outcome. Okay. And then we have at the end of season 2 when Chris isn't entirely unattached from Sherry just yet. And they kind of jump the gun there, and he's like, let's be together. But then they find out Sherry's pregnant. So again, Lorelai kind of lets her guard down, has sex with Chris, and has the rug pulled out from under her, and doesn't get what she wants in the end, which is like emotional intimacy and a family with the father of her daughter. And then we see her go to him at the end of season 6 when she needs comfort after her relationship with Luke falls apart. And this is when we get like one of the most direct criticisms of her, and it comes from Rory of all people, when she's like, you were in quite a hurry to run right to Dad, like just after breaking up with Luke. Like, did you put a dummy in the passenger seat so you could use the carpool lane? I hope you buckled your seatbelt. Safety metaphor. I just picked up on that. But yeah, Rory is resentful of Lorelai for this because of the turmoil throughout her life in terms of will they, won't they with them, and how tenuous the relationships were at times. And she's like, things are finally good, and you go and sleep with Dad, like you break up with Luke and run right over there. And it's the only time we see her sort of being like really judgmental of her mom's choices, especially as it pertains to sex. And so it's not a great moment. But then she fairly quickly has an epiphany about like, no one's perfect, and what's the big deal? So she eventually comes back and supports her mom, which is good. But yeah, the other thing I think is that I think people are judgmental of her for Chris because the fandom hates Chris.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of Chris hate there. We're not going to talk about it right this moment, but I think it was also just, perhaps a lot of like sex as a coping mechanism for several reasons, when you just have things that you cannot deal with or process in that moment, and you just need sex to be an out. Not going to go there right now. But I feel like that might have been a part of it too.
Yeah, there's a couple instances on the show where people use sex as comfort. Rory and Dean, Lorelai and Chris. Jess seeks it when he's going through, the whole like getting kicked out of school thing. He wants to use intimacy with Rory as a way to drown out the problems and just like be happy for a moment. But it horribly backfires for good reason. So it's not uncommon for that to happen in the show, which is another one of those things where I wouldn't necessarily put it in the Gilmore Girls is sex negative camp, but it is something to keep an eye on in terms of like, when are people considering sexuality, and what does that show about the health of those sexual relationships and sexual identities for the character. It's usually portrayed as a bad thing, so it's something to keep an eye on, or at least a side eye on, because it's not the best way to look at that. Another one is Rory and Logan in the revival, with Rory seemingly being unmoored, not knowing what to do with her life, going through troubles in her job, and leaning on Logan for emotional support, even though he's engaged. And we'll talk about that a lot more when we talk about cheating. But, it's a whole thing. And not only that, but she also has a one-night stand with a Wookiee, which is something she's never done before. So at the age of 32, she's having this new sexual experience, and once again is shaming herself for it. And yeah.
Yep. But not the only person to use, again, sex as a comfort on the show. I kind of want to transition us to someone else who I feel like might have been doing the same thing. Again, whether she wanted to admit it to herself or not, but Paris Geller. Do you think that her relationship with Asher, we've talked about this, like, probably a lot of daddy issues there, never having a paternal, father figure in her life. Do you feel like her relationship with Asher, and, we know that it was obviously sexual in nature, that is confirmed to us throughout the show. Do you think that stemmed from a comfort level that she was seeking out in a different way from a familial void, but now it was crossing over into her sexual, and her sex life?
I want to be careful about using the term daddy issues, because there's a lot of internalized misogyny with it. It's obviously a very important question to ask in terms of father wounds and the kinds of relationships we have modeled for us as we grow up. But I think, I don't know that it was so much that sort of like stereotype. It might have been superficially portrayed that way, but I think it's actually more like, now that Paris has freed herself from the Harvard dream and the slut label, she's embracing her sexuality more. She's been in a relationship with Jamie for a while. They've probably had more sexual experiences since that first time. She's open to exploration more. And suddenly she meets this man who is attractive to her and accomplished, sophisticated. Jamie is only a year older than her. And, he's got a lot going for him too. But I think maybe she started to feel like he wasn't the one for her, and she wanted to start exploring a little bit more now that she's going through therapy and life coaching, and she's kind of throwing off all of these old ideas about herself and these old labels. And suddenly she has this opportunity with someone new who excites her, not only sexually, but also intellectually. And that's like really hot to her. And it seems like things are maybe flaming out with Jamie. And so she's just looking for an excuse to get out of that and explore. And it's even hotter to her because it's a taboo on like multiple levels.
Yeah. And I agree with all of that. I think that Asher was always just like a stepping stone for her as well, in terms of, growing sexually as a person and finding out what she wants and, again, what her needs are going to be. Not to diminish their relationship, but I don't think those two people were ever necessarily going to end up married, be endgame for one another. I think it was just, again, sexual compatibility that probably existed, but it was just, again, especially for Paris, I think a stepping stone, which allowed her to know more about what she likes, what she doesn't like. And then she can take that into the relationships that she has moving forward, even more grounded and solidified in knowing, what do I want to get out of this? How do I make that a reality sooner, as opposed to skirting around like, should I even be having sex? Which is what she had going on with Jamie. Look how much she's grown, where she's like, should I even be doing this? Versus now coming to the realization of like, yes, I can be, and I should be whenever I want to, as long as everyone's cool about it. And again, everything is consensual. And I think she takes a lot of that knowledge base into her relationship with Doyle. And that's what allows them to have a very healthy and active sexual partnership.
Yeah, I love her and Doyle. I love how they sort of meet up at that speed dating thing, and then they sleep together that first night, and he comes out like in her robe. So cute. And then I also love when Lorelai comes to their room after her breakup from Luke, and he's there, and he introduces himself as Rory's editor, and Paris introduces him as her lover, and Lorelai's like, super. And Paris notes that the social aspects of their relationship haven't been solidified, even though the sexual aspects have, and they're crystal freaking clear in her terminology. So she wants to know what this relationship means in a grander sense, but she's very comfortable having sex with him even before that happens. And so it kind of shows how much she's progressing through her own sexual arc, and being okay with, like I said, shedding those ideas that she may have had as a teenager about her value being tied to sex, and how much sex she's having or not having. So I really like her and Doyle together, especially in those early stages where she really starts to come into her own. She's no longer having this problematic relationship with a massive power imbalance, and she's dating someone who's far more her equal, and they're both coming at this from a similar place, and they end up having a pretty healthy relationship out of it. And I almost feel like Paris ends up becoming one of the most sex positive characters on the show. Would you agree with that?
No, I absolutely would. It was a sad thing to see their, marriage dissolve and their revival and them go their separate ways, but that's also a reality. Sometimes things just don't work. We didn't really know what happened in those interim years, but for what we saw, at least at the end of their relationship within the seasons, yeah, I liked their partnership. Again, very sex positive, very healthy. Just didn't go the distance.
Yeah, sorry. I Can Go the Distance from Hercules just popped into my head. I sang an a cappella quartet of that one year, and it's been burned into my brain ever since. So thanks for that.
You'll never listen to that song the same way ever again.
Yeah, I actually have it tattooed on my foot. I got it tattooed after I ran my half marathon. So very not sex related, but thanks for ruining that for me now too.
Oh no, you're welcome. That's what I'm here for.
That's why I got it on my foot, because the running.
Yeah.
In case you didn't put that together yourself.
No, I did.
But yeah. Okay. So I feel like that's a good coverage of Paris. So I want to move on to someone who's less sex positive, or two people actually, who are less sex positive than Paris, Emily and Richard. So we talked about Emily a little bit in the first episode, and about how she tried to control Rory's sexuality through manipulation and monitoring behaviors. And now I want to talk about her and Richard and their relationship, because for one of the longest running relationship on the show, and one that kind of people hold up sometimes as couple goals, they were not entirely sexless, but it was very much like not a major part of their relationship that we were privy to.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's because as their marriage was starting out with the two of them as very young people, if unfortunately they did fall in the camp of, especially with Emily, just seeing sex as a duty, where it's like, I married my husband, my responsibility going forward within this marriage is going to be what we see her do throughout the course of the show and the decades, of their marriage, planning his social engagements, hosting clients at the house, organizing dinners, XYZ. And then just a part of that is pleasuring my husband whenever he wants it. And it's not, maybe she did fall in the camp of like, it's not even about my pleasure, it's about his. If Richard has had a long day and that's just what he's after at the end of the night, maybe at least at the beginning of the marriage, maybe it felt like a duty. Maybe as their marriage went on, it continued to just feel like something like that is obligatory when he wants it, but they don't seek each other out for it. Like, who knows? But it wouldn't surprise me if that's how it at least started out.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to say because we do see some moments of romance and flirting and desire. And so it's very clear that they're still very affectionate with each other. How much sex that equates to is unclear. But, I think to the Bracebridge dinner when, he's retired and it's making him feel freer. And all of a sudden he feels more alive and more invigorated. And he takes that and spins it into flirtation with his wife in the sleigh. And he's, joking about like her getting her hair messed up, and then he just sort of like laughs and looks at her. It's so charged in that moment. It's, something we haven't really seen from them before. And then when they have their separation, after they come back together, Lorelai's asking them about when the reconciliation happened, and Emily said yesterday, and then Richard kicks in, and last night, and this morning, which is very uncomfortable for Lorelai, but it gives us the smallest little window into their sex life. I mean, you could be right about the whole the duty thing, the obligation thing, and just sort of like the part of the discourse of toddler husbands, like women who are carers for their husbands and sort of like almost act in a motherly role are often not as desirous of their husbands because it just saps the desire when there's that much nurturing that has to go on. It becomes a lot for people to maintain that space, if you will. And I think the separation was part of what gave them like that space of the unknown that rekindled the true desire that led to the reconciliation. You could kind of see it simmering. And, go check out Esther Perel, everyone, because she explains this really well. But it's just like, we expect our spouses to be everything to us. And in Emily and Richard's case, they really are kind of everything to each other, especially Richard for Emily, because women of her class and standing and age don't have a lot of like their own life, which is unfortunate. She does what she can to have her own pursuits, but just the way that it was just like, I was raised to be a wife and a mother, and those were the only options, can be really limiting to people. And I think that's where a lot of couples struggle in marriage is the sense that like, oh God, this is it. This is all I am. This is all I have. And that's why people stray. Again, we're going to talk about this more when we talk about cheating, and I'm going to go far more into my notes on Esther Perel because she's brilliant. But you need space to create desire. Fire needs air. And I think it's such a poignant observation about human nature that like there needs to be a little bit of like a gap that has to be jumped to like get yourself there. And it can be hard to kindle that desire and to give a relationship air when your role is just constantly taking care of things like Emily is for Richard. But that said, he also travels quite a bit for work. So maybe that helps them too. And it's like when he's gone, she has a chance to miss him and vice versa. And so maybe that's part of what keeps things alive too.
Yeah, all excellent points. And not to tangentialize, I will just say, go check out Esther. I've started listening to some of her content thanks to you. And she is remarkable with what she throws out into the universe.
Yeah.
So I would check with that.
I listened to her audiobook, Mating in Captivity, and I'm currently reading The State of Affairs. So get ready for lots of like well-researched notes from an actual practicing psychologist about infidelity, because it's going to get good when we do that. But I want to make one more point about Emily before moving on. That again, tangent with Esther Perel. But I also really love in Wedding Bell Blues when they throw the last minute bachelorette for her, and it's like, oh, I feel like we should be doing something, like I feel like we should be doing something naughty, basically, is what Sookie says. And then Lorelai goes to get the pen 15 shaped pasta that Sookie gave her. I'm assuming around her engagement to Max and that bachelorette party. Lorelai hands it to Emily, and her reaction is, "Oh my god, oh my god!" And then she just sort of like divests herself of it. And Keon asks, "What are they laughing at?" And Lane's just like, "Have a tater tot." You know, just the whole like, let's protect innocent little Keon from whatever that just was. But just her sort of very prudish reaction to receiving obscene pasta was priceless.
You're ruining pasta for me.
This is just the worst episode for Italians ever. I'm sorry if you're Italian and want to unsubscribe.
Or subscribe, because I'll make up for this one day with some, I don't know. My Italian heart will get you back for this. I promise. Like, I'll teach you how to make like some quality chicken marsala one day. Anyhow.
How do we know that pasta is not quality, even though it's obscene? You know?
I'm not going to go there.
With the right sauce and the... I'm sorry, I can't even take myself seriously with that. Anyway, moving on.
Moving on. Speaking of someone who was probably, excellent at making non-obscene pasta, and who I want us to talk about a little bit next, Sookie. I think she was getting into her relationship with Jackson. Not necessarily maybe off of like a dry spell as, was illustrated and shown to us with Rory. But perhaps it had been a minute for her. And she was just in need of some companionship. Talk to me a little bit about that. How you feel like it affected her relationship with Jackson. Did they come together too quickly because of that? Because I feel like that can be not just with them, but like I feel like within relationships too, that can sometimes be a common, not mistake, but something that happens where it's just been so long that two people can have relations that are just stemming from like an immediate need, but that doesn't equate to compatibility. I don't think that's what we saw with Sookie and Jackson. I think they are actually two people that are genuinely very good for one another. But talk to me about their the beginning of their relationship in that regard.
Yeah, we don't actually know a ton about it. Obviously, we see their date. And I think you're right, because when she's talking to Lorelai in Paris is Burning, she said, like, Lorelai sort of accuses her of not having been out on a date herself in a while. And it's like, well, who are you to give me dating advice when you're not even dating yourself right now? So it probably has been a little while for her. And what we do know is in that Damn Donna Reed, she tells, or she sort of confronts Lorelai about the whole calling Luke over to help find Stella thing. And she's like, well, my first time with Jackson, I called him and told him I had a bat in my attic. So, she had to use an excuse. Again, something women do to obscure their desire for sex, to make it seem like it's just like, oh, this is just happening, instead of just being forthright with what they want. So there's that. I don't think it was too fast, though, because by the time she said that, we were 3 episodes later, which in Showtime is like 3 months usually. So with the screwed up timelines, we have no idea. But I think, again, as a pairing that had an existing friendship and seemingly a solid early romantic relationship, I think it was totally reasonable for them to get together like that. I think what's more interesting to me about Sookie and her sex life is kind of the lack of it from there on out. Even, so before she gets with Jackson, when she's talking to Lorelai in the diner in the Cinnamon's Wake episode, Lorelai's telling her about Max, and she's like, it'd be nice to get some, And so he's like, no, I don't know. And she's like, no, that guy knows. And she points down the counter, and I think his name is Jed, the character that guy plays. He's a few characters. He's also Henry at the Renaissance Fair. And he's like, yeah, I know. Like, he's picking up on her euphemism, and Sookie is being portrayed as almost childlike in her lack of understanding of this. And it's sort of like a desexualization that's happening with her, where it's like, she's a grown woman and she's not picking up on Lorelai being like, it'd be nice to have a sex life, you know? It's just so like, ooh. And other than, you know, her going through 3 pregnancies, we have no further proof that Sookie has a sex life. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think she probably did, even if we didn't have it verbalized to us. Again, you know, more time is going to be spent on our main characters, not so much doing a deep dive exploration into Jackson and Sookie's marriage. But I feel like it's also just I don't know, I want to say like common thing, but you know, when you have kids, like I'm sure, you know, it takes time away from intimacy because there's so much responsibility and care that has to go into those individuals and putting them first that sometimes as a parent, like your own needs take like just get put on the back burner. And sometimes those back burner needs can be your sexual ones because, you know, yeah, maybe you were hoping to have, you know, an intimate night with your partner, but, you know, your kid has chicken pox or is throwing up or is feeling ill and you need to attend to that. There are so many things that can just, you know, have the sex portion of your relationship be diminished, not because there's a lack of desire or attraction, but just because, you know, now in Sookie's case, it's like you have 3 very small children that you and Jackson need to be responsible for. I'm sure that's cutting into the time that you would be able to have with one another.
Yeah. And I get the sense, especially as of season 7, after the surprise pregnancy plotline, it seems like, I don't know if it's just the situation at hand or is a larger pattern in their relationship, but it seems like Sookie sort of resents Jackson and views him as a toddler husband because she's like, you know, don't misbehave. Lorelai's essentially like, you know, you leave stuff around and you're loud and don't do this, don't do that. And, you know, maybe she's just cranky because of the strain on their relationship now and the fact that she's tired and pregnant and hormonal. But it seems like maybe she views Jackson as, you know, another kid she has to take care of sometimes because of his lack of maturity. So there's that. I think you're probably right there. My other more insidious take on this, and I don't even like saying it because it feels so icky, but the fact that like Melissa McCarthy is a plus size actress and sort of like the desexualization of both like, well, it's hard to say if Emily was desexualized based on her age. You know, I think there's only a little bit of it in there. It could have something to do with that, but yeah, just the fact that it's sort of like there's a few reasons, you know, the motherhood thing, the toddler husband thing, and I'm also wondering maybe if a little bit of it is that like it's not male gazy enough for her to be a sexual object in the show. And especially once she becomes a wife and a mother, like that's all she is. Her sexuality or any appeal of romance or desire is just poof, gone for her. I don't know what it is. I hope it's not that. But given the fat phobic nature of a lot of comments and perspectives on the show, I wouldn't be surprised if there was sort of a purposeful desexualization of her and like a rush to make her a wife and mom so that people weren't questioning her sexuality. Which actually brings me to an interesting point that I learned, which is that apparently Amy wanted to make her a lesbian at first. And I'm wondering what you think about that and what that might have meant for the show. Obviously, the network didn't go for it. And going back to the very beginning of our talk about sex, you know, this was intended to be a family-friendly show. And so the exclusion of anything that's not a cis heteronormative relationship was excluded. So talk to me about what you think about lesbian Sookie or that particular topic on the show and the kinds of representations we saw of sex and relationships.
It wouldn't have surprised me if the network shut it down just because the network, obviously, first and foremost, was, you know, we're creating a family-friendly pilot here. We can't lead off the bat introducing even a secondary character as someone who is queer in any way. It's just not going to fly. We're going to shoot it down. I don't know if that was the network's decision. and they just told Amy no. It could have also been maybe just, of the times, so to say, even though this was only going back, 20 some odd years now. I still don't know if we would have been in a place at that point in time to have been as accepting of it as we would be, here going into 2024. It might have cost the network a lot of viewers because people are just like, oh no, can't watch a show that has, someone like that on it. So maybe there was just also a consideration of how this would affect viewership. If it would allow the show to be successful, a possible instant backlash with people with the network just being concerned about that. I think it's a sad reality, but I think it's something that they may have considered, and that's might have been why they shot it down. Me personally sitting here again as someone in her 30s now going into 2024, like I wouldn't have cared. But even as a 14-year-old who is still who would not have been as knowledgeable as, I am here now about those sorts of issues, I still think I would have just watched the show and just been like, 14-year-old me would have been like, yeah, but what's going on with Rory and Dean? Like, I still don't think it would have fazed me. And, who's to say, like, how it would have affected her sex life? I think she still would have just been the person that she is, regardless of whether she was with a man or a woman. I think her growth would have remained the same. But, yeah, I just think it was just a result of the time that the show was being put out there, the network that was commissioning it. But I also would say, like, I really don't think I would have ever cared.
I definitely wouldn't have cared. I've never been particularly judgmental about stuff like that. Literally never. Even when I was younger. So I'm more curious about, whether she would have had the same opportunities and arc. Like, even if they had made her a lesbian, would they have given her a healthy, functioning queer relationship? Like, would they have actually made that a thing? Or would her sexuality always be the punchline? Because the show, like, one of the biggest problems I've noticed with it is its rampant homophobia. So not only is there a lack of representation just in terms of like avoiding the subject altogether, but there are actively homophobic comments made and used as jokes. And so I wonder if it would have been, the butt of the joke constantly for her to be a lesbian.
I mean, I hope not. Like, not that anything was ever going to come of it, but we see Paris and Rory kiss in the spring break episode, and granted that was just because, it wasn't stemming from attraction. It was just stemming from Paris being like, let's just give it a shot. See if it, has anyone looking our way in terms of someone I might actually want to talk with. They broached it there a little bit, which I think up until that point was probably the most transparent display of it that we had seen.
Yeah, but it was played as a joke.
Yeah, that's the problem though.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Like, so we see it, but like nothing comes of it, and it's just, oh, I was just doing it to, again, see if I could garner attention, but I don't actually care about, like, obviously those two women didn't care about each other in that way. And then, we have a male that comes up and was just like, oh yeah, I saw it. That was really hot. It's like,
yeah, again, another trope and stereotype of girls just kissing each other to attract the male gaze.
Yeah, so not good there. And then even, other just slight nods to potentially other characters being queer. Just nothing is ever explicitly said. It's just all so swept under the rug, and like, we'll hint at it, but we'll never confirm it to you. Maybe we're not even really hinting at it. Maybe this is just like a red herring. It's like, why don't just tell us? Like, just throw it out into the universe if any one of these characters are. Like, there's so much cloak and dagger, and it does the entire community such a disrespect.
Yeah, it's, again, completely, when it's not swept under the rug, it is lampooned. There are so many like inappropriate lesbian references. Like anytime Lorelai makes a lesbian joke, Emily just gives her the death stare. And, that just leads me to believe that any attempts at representation would not be taken seriously or handled appropriately. So there's that. On the on the Paris and Rory front, I know a lot of people ship them. And I'm just like, I don't ship them, not because I'm homophobic, but because especially their early friendship was extremely toxic. There was so much aggression and backstabbing and just like really negative emotions and stuff there. And it's that sort of, oh, he's only mean to you because he likes you trope. A perpetuation of the terrible idea that people treating you badly is somehow flirting with you. And, it calls to mind Paige and Emily in Pretty Little Liars. Paige actively bullies Emily when she finds out that Emily is gay and go so far as to try to drown her in the school pool. But then they end up dating later because psych, Paige is also a lesbian and like, oh, it's fine. It's cute. It was just repressed homophobia and self-loathing all along.
I've never seen that show or that episode, but that's a trip. So healthy.
It's such a trip, man. It's like 7 seasons of a fever dream. But yeah, like there are so many bad relationship dynamics in that. There's a teacher-student one. There's like that. There's like all kinds of weird coercion and stuff going on with that. But it's neither here nor there. This is not a Pretty Little Liars podcast. But yeah, Paige and Emily have been pointed out as a problematic ship because of, Paige's initial treatment of Emily. And, the whole like, oh, sorry, I was just repressing my interest in you all along is a bad message to be sending, especially to the queer community. It just, reinforces the fact that like it's not okay to be yourself, and only after like really wrestling with it is it okay for you to even express your true self and your true desires. But anyway, not super relevant for this conversation, but just gonna throw it out there that Rory and Paris should not have been together, at least as the show was written. If they were gonna do that initially, they needed to make that a healthier relationship and not so bad. It would be like the equivalent of Rory dating Tristan, who, made fun of her and demeaned her, belittled her, tried to manipulate and coerce her. Just about as bad as that. But going back to representation on the show, that kind of brings us to the revival where, we've got the gay pride parade thing, which is clearly an attempt on the part of the showrunners to show that they're aware of the criticism that their show wasn't very representative, but to also flip the bird at us at the same time, because it's clear that they didn't actually learn from that. Because once again, they use it as like a punchline, a joke. It's just a bit in the middle of an episode. And, we finally get the reveal that Michelle is gay. Although the thing about Michelle that I'm wondering is maybe he's bisexual. Like maybe he is interested in women, but he's also interested in men and just ended up in a long-term relationship with a man. Nobody ever seems to consider that. And I'm like, yeah, because there's so many times in the early seasons when he's like, the ladies love it. And I'm like, maybe that's true of ladies. Maybe the dudes don't react to that for him as much. But obviously everything else about him is very queer-coded. His love of Celine Dion, last but not least. So there's that. And then, the talk of the parade and the whole town kind of looking at Taylor and being like, are you sure there's no one else who could walk in this parade, Taylor? Anyone else?
Bueller, Dosey.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like Taylor, he was obviously just not picking up on what they were putting down, in terms of like, hey, we suspect maybe, can you confirm? Not that we're going to care, but like, you can put it out into the universe and maybe like the town hall is a safe space for you. I feel like he was just so honed in on like the actual parade itself as like a town event, not, concerned with the social commentary behind it that he was just like, can we just have the parade? Like, I don't understand what you guys are going for here. Personally, I have always thought that Taylor was gay. That has always been my read and my take. It was just never confirmed to us, but that's always been my suspicion. And I would actually love to just get Michael Winters back and Revival 2.0, just have that be confirmed. And now he's just like owning it more so within Stars Hollow that he ever could, and seeing the townspeople just embrace him even more for it and being like, we've known all along, but it's nice to have you, not be so closeted about it anymore.
I feel like it potentially was Amy's intention to have him be gay coded, but I have an alternate theory, and I've never heard anybody mention this, and I'm like, but how? My theory is that maybe he's aro ace, or one or the other. It would still put him under the umbrella and in the community, and like pride could very much be something that he could adopt for himself. But like, I haven't seen a ton of indication of any interest in women or men from him. I mean, other than him calling Violet the most beautiful woman he's ever seen, I didn't even really get a sexual read on that. And so I'm almost wondering if, like, we never hear anything about an ex-wife or anything else but his love for the town. And so it maybe makes me think that romanticism and sexuality are just not that important in his life. There might be some experiences with them or some like gray sexuality or gray romanticism, but he's to me coded more as asexual. Just like his love is Stars Hollow, and that's all he ever needs. Like it's not among his desires, and that's totally like a valid thing for him.
Yeah, I've never thought about that either, but I could buy into it.
I feel like there's a lot of aro ace erasure in media. Like, we always have to assume that someone is either straight or gay. Bi erasure, asexual erasure. Some scientists aren't even like willing to admit that asexuality exists, but like clearly there's evidence of it. There's still things that are unknown about it. But, why is it any less valid for him not to be interested in those things?
Yeah.
Or not to prioritize them, at least.
Yeah. I could see it, having traction and truth to it. Revival 2.0, please and thank you, so we can get some confirmation.
Yeah. I'm here for it. But I think that's a good place to cut episode 2. As much as I could say more about the like troubling homophobia in the show, Zach, I'm looking at you. I could go off for a long time on that, and I won't, because we've already gone over how long we wanted to be recording this episode. So next week, we're going to continue this with the last part of this, part 3. We had like 95 pages total of notes, so that's why we had to do this in 3 parts. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about sex positivity on the show on the whole, and some of the more troubling aspects of it, and objectification of the actors and the characters, and some of the other problematic ideas around sex that are exhibited on the show. So join us for that, because there's still more goodness to come.
Yep. While you wait for that, go back and watch last week's episode, part 1, where we focused on, sex and sex positivity, and the exploration of anyone's sexuality as an adolescent and as a young person. I think there was a lot of good stuff that was said there that will just, transition into part 3 next week that you're about to see. And just keep watching any of our old episodes if you want, as well as GG. Always a good time to binge. And please just remember to do all those YouTube things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel. It's 1 click below, and it really does help us out. And we're always so grateful for that support.
We really are. And on that note, we will see you next Friday for dinner.
Ciao.
Bye.